On Christmas Day, 1997, as others were spreading joy and celebrating the holiday season, 39-year-old Anatoli Boukreev, a prominent and notorious figure in the world of high-altitude climbing, was on a daring mountaineering mission with two other men. The adventurous trio was attempting to climb a new alpine route during the winter on what many consider to be the world's deadliest mountain, Annapurna 1 in the Himalayas. Though he knew it would be challenging, Anatoli hoped the climb would be another successful achievement for him and his comrades. But fate had other plans, as during the expedition, an enormous cornice would break loose, creating utter chaos in its wake. In an instant, the reel of their lives played out before them, a montage of memories and experiences, as their terrifying last moments unfolded just as Anatoli himself had foreshadowed 9 months prior. This is the dire tale of Anatoli Nikolaevich Boukreev and his tragic last days on Annapurna. Annapurna is a mountain massif, or portion of a mountain range containing one or more summits, located in the Himalayas region of Nepal. The massif has 4 main summits, Annapurna 1, 2, 3, and 4, with Annapurna 1 being the tallest of the massif, and the world's 10th highest peak standing at 8,091 meters, or 26,545 feet. Though there have been several successful attempts to climb Annapurna's peak, the extremely steep and committing nature of its climbing route, unpredictable weather, and avalanche danger pose a great threat to climbers. The current fatality rate on Annapurna stands anywhere from 27 to 32%, which means that 1 in 3 climbers that attempt it will die. However, Kazakh-Russian Anatoli Boukreev had an ambitious idea of trying a new route in the Alpine using a modern-day lightweight style of climbing during winter. Along with fellow accomplished Italian mountaineer Simone Moro, the duo was to ascend the treacherous and, at the time, unclimbed southern face of Annapurna. Tagging along for this audacious adventure was Dmitry Sobolev, a Kazakh cinematographer whose main duty was to document the most ambitious attempt in Anatoli's storied mountaineering career. While the climb was certainly worthwhile enough to merit an attempt, they all knew that it wasn't going to be a straightforward task, given the reputation of the deadly mountain. But Anatoli, being renowned as an elite mountaineer within the global climbing community, was certain he could do it. It's safe to say he had a resilience that few mountaineers could match. Anatoli made his first solo ascent to Lenin Peak in 1987, and from then on it was clear that he was determined to push the highest limits. He had made ascents of 10 out of the 14 8,000er peaks, all without supplemental oxygen. 4 of those summits were made within 80 days of each other. In 1993, Anatoli summited K2 via the Abruzzi route before summiting Mount Everest via the North Ridge route in 1995. He was also the guide for the president of Kazakhstan to the 4,010 peak Abai on the Zylysky Alatau mountain range in the same year. However, it was not until the 1996 Mount Everest disaster that he became more widely known. On May 10, 1996, a disastrous blizzard struck Everest, stranding many climbers overnight at the South Col. On that tragic night, Anatoli would leave the safety and comfort of his tent multiple times to rescue other climbers trapped in the horrific storm. His rescue efforts were described by the Wall Street Journal as one of the most amazing rescues in mountaineering history, performed single-handedly a few hours after climbing Everest without oxygen. However, not everyone praised Anatoli as such, and one of his biggest critics at the time of the Everest disaster was journalist John Krakauer, who stated that Anatoli was too rigid in his duties as a guide. Krakauer believed Anatoli was partially culpable and should have helped other stranded climbers like Beck Weathers and Yasuko Namba, and not just the climbers on the Mountain Madness expedition. Anatoli was expected to be the weakest after climbing without oxygen, but proved to be stronger than some of his fellow guides. The following day, while many of the climbers were still digesting the tragedy that had befallen them, Anatoli was up on the mountain again. He ascended to 8,400 meters in a solo attempt to rescue his expedition leader, Scott Fisher, who had fallen seriously ill with mountain sickness and had sent for his help. Unfortunately, Scott was one of the several who perished during that fateful storm over Everest. As if that wasn't already enough, 6 days later, Anatoli made a solo ascent from base camp on Mount Everest after Scott's memorial to the summit of the neighboring Lhotse, with a speed record of 21 hours 16 minutes. In 1997, Anatoli was awarded the David A. Sowles Memorial Award by the American Alpine Club in recognition of his acts of valor in rescuing climbers in the 1996 Mount Everest disaster. He also holds several solo speed ascent records of some of the highest mountains in the world. And thus, with such a remarkable track record, this new attempt on Annapurna by Anatoli and his team was not an entirely impossible feat to try. 3 weeks after receiving the David A. Sowles Memorial Award, Anatoli began his attempt to climb the south face of Annapurna. With their ropes meticulously coiled, ice axes inspected, and backpacks laden with provisions for the taxing ascent, Anatoli, Simone, and Dmitry set foot on the trail. Dmitry, the seasoned cinematographer, was armed with his camera ready to capture the physical high-altitude ascent and preserve the memory of their intangible collective spirit of adventure. On Christmas Day, December 25, 1997, the trio continued making solid progress up the new route, and by noon they had reached an altitude of about 5,700 meters. Suddenly, Simone, who was on the lead as they were fixing ropes in a couloir, noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The air buzzed with an eerie stillness, and the peaks above seemed to hold their breath. Unbeknownst to the trio, an enormous cornice, perched loosely high above them, awaited its fateful release. The mountain, in its silent majesty, decided it was time to test the spirits of those who dared to challenge its heights. With an ominous crack that reverberated through the frozen air, the cornice gave in to gravity and broke loose. Simone, who was the furthest ahead of the group, saw the cornice break and shouted out to Anatoli and Dmitry to brace for the incoming avalanche. A thunderous roar accompanied its descent as it rumbled down the 800-meter-long couloir, gathering momentum and snow. The serenity shattered as the avalanche exploded into existence, a roiling juggernaut of ice and fury. Desperation etched across the trio's faces as they found themselves in a frantic battle for survival. They had neither the time to cling on to something nor to hide from the massive rushing wall of ice and snow. Simone and Anatoli were the first to be caught in the merciless embrace of the surging wall of white, while Dmitry was a few meters behind. Simone clung desperately to an ice axe as the avalanche violently hurled them down Annapurna's face. His shouts were swallowed by the tumult as the avalanche carried him nearly 400 meters downhill, landing just above their tent at Camp 1. Having unleashed its turmoil, Annapurna now stood silent once more, as if contemplating the fate it had just dealt. The snow settled, revealing a tableau of both triumph and tragedy. Spared by the whims of fate, Simone emerged from the chaos alive, but his body was battered. He had somehow managed to stay near the top of the debris and was therefore able to dig himself out after a short while. Meanwhile, Anatoli and Dmitry, who had been entangled in the churning snowslide, were busy fighting against the suffocating weight of the snow. Simone, who had moments earlier witnessed them disappearing beneath car-sized blocks of ice, couldn't see or hear any signs of them. He desperately called out for them, but was met with pin-drop silence. Simone knew he had to get help as quickly as possible, and so he hastily descended to the Annapurna base camp where he broke the news of their tragic encounter. He was then flown by helicopter back to Kathmandu for surgery on his hands, which had been ripped down to the tendons during the fall. As news of the horrific incident spread, a rescue effort was organized to search for the missing mountaineers. Lieutenant Colonel Madden K.C. of the Nepalese Army, who became famous for the daring helicopter rescue of Beck Weathers and Makalu Gao off Everest in 1996, flew at least 2 helicopter search missions with inconclusive results in marginal conditions. The volatile winter weather conditions that flogged Annapurna rendered search teams on foot slow to progress, while helicopter searches were also of no help, as the weather didn't permit them to fly at all, and if they did, the visibility was too poor to bear any meaningful result. During their ascent, the trio had set up a high camp well stocked with supplies, 20 days' worth of food, and sleeping bags just 50 m below the avalanche site. Simone was still hopeful that the men had survived and taken refuge at the high camp, which would buy them a little more time to find them. After all, Anatoli was a man who often drew strength from the most extreme conditions. Yet, again, the bad weather didn't give any room for people to go to the high camp and check if the duo had actually made it there. A few days later, a tent was spotted near the avalanche site, igniting a glimmer of hope, but upon aerial inspection, it quickly faded as the tent was found to be empty. There was also confusion on the actual location of the tent, as many argued that the empty tent was actually on a lower camp and not the one closer to the avalanche site. Linda Wiley, Anatoli's girlfriend, left for Nepal on the 28th of December 1997 and joined the rescuers at the base camp with hopes that her boyfriend and his photographer would be found alive. However, by the time the year had turned to 1998, the hope of the duo's survival had significantly dwindled. On January 4, 1998, a ground search party consisting of Sherpa and Kazakh climbers finally reached Annapurna's Camp 1 and found an empty tent. The tent was still full of supplies, and there were no signs of anyone being there recently. The team combed every nook and cranny of the debris field but were still unable to locate the duo. The search was officially called off, and their fate was considered sealed. Subsequently, Linda Wiley broke the news of her boyfriend's demise and issued a somber statement from Kathmandu stating, "There is no longer any hope of finding him alive. I only hope the searchers will locate his body for a proper burial in a crevasse. Anatoli would like to stay in the mountains." Further searches of the men's bodies through the chest-deep snow eventually confirmed the mountaineer's demise, as one of Dimitri's cameras, a diary, and some clothing were later found by a Sherpa searcher combing the debris field. Their vivid dreams of conquering the summit via the new route were now truly silenced, and their lifeless bodies remained hidden somewhere beneath the cold embrace of the snow. In his memoirs, Anatoli had scribbled how he had dreamt in detail of dying in an avalanche 9 months prior to his passing. The only thing missing was the name of the mountain. But when his companion tried to convince him to take a different path in life to avoid the fate that Anatoli was certain of, he responded, "Mountains are my life, my work. It is too late for me to take up another road." In the wake of the heartbreaking news of Anatoli's tragic end, his family, friends, and colleagues reminisced about their time with him, and each paid tribute to him in their own way. Weston DeWalt, a good friend and co-author of Anatoli's book, The Climb, which helped defend his reputation after he received backlash for his role in the 1996 Mount Everest disaster, remembered him as a hard trainer and highly disciplined individual. DeWalt recalled having a conversation with the legendary mountaineer that now lingered vividly in his mind. Anatoli was describing a near-death experience in Manaslu while rescuing his fellow climbers in December 1996. Anatoli firmly stated that there wasn't enough luck in the world and that he survived that night through somebody else's luck. Following his demise, DeWalt now believed that Anatoli didn't run out of luck, but instead gave his life to save someone else who needed it more that day. To honor his memory and acts of valor, a sculpture of Anatoli created by Nurlan Dalbai was unveiled at the Medeu Ice Sports Rink on January 18, 2023. Here, the ambitious mountaineer is shown at rest with his hand on an ice axe. Additionally, at the site of Annapurna Base Camp, there is a chorten, a Tibetan Buddhist shrine, in his memory with one of his favorite quotes inscribed on it. "Mountains are not stadiums where I satisfy my ambition to achieve. They are the cathedrals where I practice my religion." John Krakauer, the author of Into Thin Air, and Anatoli's biggest critic, described Anatoli's last climb as an exceptionally ambitious and dangerous undertaking. Had he succeeded, it would have been one of the boldest ascents in the history of Himalayan mountaineering. Unfortunately, it turned out horribly, and true to what he had stated in his memoirs, the last word always belongs to the mountain. So what do you think? Should Anatoli and his team have taken more precautions before their ascent? Was his premonition a true foreshadowing of events to come, or a mere coincidence? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. And if you found this video thought-provoking or impactful, please give it a like and remember to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on more dire tales, always in honor of those who have passed. Thanks for watching.